Grace Lawson had never felt more like a failure than the moment she dropped the entire tray of plates in the middle of the Silver City saloon, every eye in the crowded room turning to witness her humiliation. It was her third day working as a waitress, and already she could see the impatience growing in her employer's eyes. The shattered porcelain scattered across the wooden floor like fragments of her confidence, and she fought back tears as she knelt to gather the pieces with trembling hands. "That's coming out of your wages," Mr. Henderson barked from behind the bar, his thick mustache twitching with irritation. "And if you break one more thing this week, you're finished." Grace nodded mutely, her cheeks burning with shame as the other patrons returned to their drinks and conversations. At 21 years old, she had already been dismissed from 3 positions in the 2 months since she had arrived in this New Mexico mining town in the spring of 1878. First, she had been let go from the general store for miscounting inventory. Then the seamstress had sent her away after Grace had ruined an expensive bolt of silk. The boarding house had dismissed her from cleaning duties when she accidentally used lye soap on delicate curtains, leaving them in tatters. Everything she touched seemed to crumble or break. Every task she attempted ended in disaster. Her father's words echoed in her mind, the ones he had spoken before his death a year ago. "Gracie, you have got to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I will not always be here to catch you when you fall." But he had died before teaching her how, leaving her orphaned and alone with barely enough money to make the journey west to Silver City, where a distant cousin had promised her work and a place to stay. That cousin had since moved to California, leaving Grace stranded in a town where she knew no one and possessed no skills that anyone seemed to value. She swept up the broken plates with shaking hands, hyper-aware of every movement, terrified of making another mistake. When she finally stood, her knees ached from kneeling on the hard floor, and a thin line of blood traced down her palm where a shard had cut her. She wrapped it quickly in her apron, not wanting to draw more attention to herself. The evening dragged on with excruciating slowness. Grace moved through the saloon like a ghost, delivering drinks and meals with painstaking care, second-guessing every step. By the time the last patron stumbled out into the warm May night, she was exhausted not from physical labor, but from the constant anxiety that coursed through her veins. "You can go," Mr. Henderson said curtly, not looking up from his ledger. "Be here at noon tomorrow. And Grace, maybe this line of work is not for you. Start thinking about what else you might do, because I cannot afford to keep replacing dishes." The walk back to her tiny rented room above the tobacco shop felt longer than usual. The mountain air was cool and crisp, scented with pine and dust. Silver City sat in a valley surrounded by the rugged Mogollon Mountains, their dark silhouettes visible against the star-studded sky. It was beautiful country, wild and untamed, but Grace felt no connection to it. She felt like a fragile china doll placed in the middle of a rock quarry, bound to shatter at the first tremor. Her room was sparse, containing only a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. She sat on the edge of the mattress and finally allowed herself to cry, pressing her face into her hands to muffle the sound. What was wrong with her? Why could she not do even the simplest tasks without failing? Other women her age were married with children, or running successful businesses, or at least holding down steady employment. But Grace could not even carry a tray across a room without destroying everything on it. The next morning, she woke with swollen eyes and a heavy heart. She had 4 hours before she needed to be at the saloon, so she decided to walk to the edge of town where the wilderness began, hoping the solitude might calm her frayed nerves. She packed a small bundle with some bread and cheese, filled her canteen with water from the pump in the alley, and set out as the sun was just beginning to paint the sky pink and gold. The path led away from the main street, past the last scattered houses and into the foothills where juniper and piñon trees grew in twisted formations. Grace walked without any real destination, simply putting one foot in front of the other, breathing in the clean air and trying to silence the critical voice in her head. The town disappeared behind her as the trail climbed higher, winding between red rocks and scrubby vegetation. She must have walked for over an hour when she heard the sound of an axe striking wood. The rhythmic crack echoed through the canyon, and curiosity drew her toward it. Rounding a bend in the trail, she came upon a clearing where a cabin stood, solid and well built from hewn logs. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and stacked against one wall were several cords of neatly split firewood. But what stopped Grace in her tracks was the man wielding the axe. He was enormous, at least 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His arms, bare below rolled-up sleeves, were thick with muscle that flexed and bunched with each powerful swing. Long dark hair, touched with hints of brown and copper, fell past his collar, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore simple clothes, work-worn trousers and a shirt that clung to his powerful frame with sweat. He must have sensed her presence because he lowered the axe and turned. His eyes, a striking shade of blue-gray like storm clouds, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, Grace frozen on the trail like a rabbit caught in the open, and the mountain man watching her with an expression she could not read. "You lost." His voice was deep, rumbling up from his chest, but not unkind. No, I was just walking. I did not mean to intrude on your property. I should go." Grace took a step backward, already preparing to flee. No need to run off. He set the axe down and reached for a shirt hanging on a nearby branch, shrugging it on but not bothering with the buttons. "Not many folks come up this way." "You from town?" Grace nodded, still keeping her distance. She had heard stories about mountain men, solitary trappers and hunters who lived away from civilization. Some said they were dangerous, others that they were simply eccentric. This man did not look dangerous exactly, but he certainly looked like he could break a person in half without much effort. "I work at the saloon. Or I did. I probably will not have the job much longer." She had no idea why she was telling this to a complete stranger, but something about the quiet stillness of the clearing made her tongue loosen. "I am not very good at it. I am not very good at anything, really." The mountain man studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving from her worn dress to her bandaged hand to her face, which she was sure still showed signs of last night's tears. "That is a hard thing to believe about yourself." "It is true, though. I have been fired from every position I have held since coming to Silver City. I break things, I make mistakes. I cannot seem to do anything right." The words tumbled out now, a confession to this stranger who had no reason to care. "My father always said I was too nervous, too afraid of my own shadow. He was right. Your father sounds like he was not much good at encouragement." The man moved toward a water barrel near the cabin and dipped a tin cup into it, drinking deeply before refilling it and holding it out to Grace. "Name is Samuel Foster. Most people call me Sam. I have lived up here for about 5 years now, hunting, trapping, cutting timber. It is a good life if you do not mind solitude." Grace moved closer cautiously and accepted the water. Her hands were steadier than they had been last night. "Grace Lawson, thank you for the water." "You want to sit a spell, Grace Lawson? I was about to take a break anyway, and I have got some coffee on the stove inside." She knew she should decline. She should return to town and prepare herself for another anxious shift at the saloon. But something about this man, about the calm confidence in his bearing and the lack of judgment in his eyes, made her want to stay. All right, just for a few minutes. The inside of the cabin was surprisingly tidy, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall, a sturdy table and chairs, and a bed in the corner covered with what looked like a bearskin. Shelves held supplies, tools, and a few books. Sam poured coffee into 2 tin cups and gestured for Grace to sit. "So tell me what you are afraid of," he said, settling into the chair across from her. His large frame made the furniture look almost delicate. "I do not understand what you mean. I just told you I fail at everything." "That is not what I asked. Failing at things is just what happens when you try. I want to know what you are afraid of." His blue-gray eyes held hers, steady and patient. Grace wrapped her hands around the warm cup, feeling the heat seep into her palms. No one had ever asked her that question before. "I suppose I am afraid that everyone is right about me, that I really am worthless, that I will never be good at anything, that I will always be alone and struggling." "And so you are so worried about proving them right that you shake and stumble and make the very mistakes you are afraid of making." It was not a question, but Grace nodded anyway. "How did you know?" "I have seen it before. I used to trap with a partner, years back. Good man, skilled hunter, but he was terrified of making a mistake out in the wilderness. That fear made him sloppy. He would check his traps too quickly, not paying attention, always rushing because he was so anxious. One day his fear caused him to step right into one of his own beaver traps. Broke his ankle in 3 places. Grace winced. "What happened to him?" "I got him back to town and he healed up fine. But he learned something important. Fear is like a poison. Small doses can keep you cautious and safe. Too much, and it paralyzes you, makes you do the very things you are trying to avoid." Sam leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "You know what I think, Grace Lawson? I think you have been drinking too much of that poison. I do not know how to stop. You start small. You find one thing, just one thing, that you can do without that voice in your head telling you that you are going to fail. And you do it, over and over, until it becomes as natural as breathing. Then you find another thing, and another. Pretty soon, you have got a whole list of things you can do, and that voice gets quieter and quieter." Grace wanted to believe him, but doubt coiled in her stomach like a snake. What if I cannot even find that one thing? Sam stood and walked to the shelves, returning with a knife and a piece of wood. "Can you whittle?" "I have never tried." "Good. Then you have got no expectations to fail. Here, watch." He sat back down and began to carve, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy and precision. Curls of pale wood fell away and slowly a shape began to emerge. It is just about taking your time, feeling the grain of the wood, not forcing anything. Let the knife do the work. He handed her the knife and a fresh piece of wood. "Your turn. Just try to smooth down this edge here. Do not think about it too much, just feel it." Grace took the knife, her hand trembling slightly. The wooden handle was warm from Sam's grip. She placed the blade against the wood and pulled gently. A thin shaving came away and nothing broke, nothing went wrong. She tried again and another curl of wood fell. "There you go," Sam said quietly. "See, you are doing it." For the next hour, Grace sat at that table and whittled. Sam moved about the cabin, doing small tasks, occasionally offering a word of advice or encouragement, but mostly leaving her to focus on the simple, repetitive motion of blade against wood. And something remarkable happened. The anxiety in her chest began to loosen. Her hands grew steadier. The critical voice in her mind faded to a whisper. By the time she realized how much time had passed, the sun had climbed high in the sky. "Oh no, I need to get back to town. I am supposed to work soon." Sam walked her to the door of the cabin. "Keep the knife and the wood. Practice when you can." And Grace, remember what I said. The fear is lying to you. You are more capable than you believe. As Grace hurried back down the mountain trail, the knife and wood tucked into her pocket, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. It was not quite hope, not yet, but it was something close to it. A tiny spark of possibility. The afternoon shift at the saloon went slightly better than the previous evening. Grace still felt anxious, but she tried to remember Sam's words about the poison of fear. When she felt her hands starting to shake, she took a slow breath and steadied them. She moved more deliberately, taking her time instead of rushing. She still made mistakes. She spilled a bit of beer while pouring, and she forgot one customer's order, but she did not drop anything. And Mr. Henderson said nothing to her except a curt nod when she left for the evening. That night in her room, she took out the wood and knife and practiced whittling by lamplight. The motion was soothing, meditative. She could lose herself in the simple task and forget, for a little while, about all her failures and fears. Over the next week, Grace found herself making excuses to walk up the mountain trail. Each time, she would find Sam working somewhere around his cabin, splitting wood, tanning hides, repairing tools. And each time, he would stop what he was doing and spend time with her, teaching her small skills. He showed her how to identify edible plants, how to start a fire with flint and steel, how to track animals by their signs. He taught her to shoot his rifle, standing behind her with his arms guiding hers, his solid presence like an anchor keeping her steady. "You have got a good eye," he said after she hit a tree trunk 3 times in a row. "You just needed to trust yourself enough to take the shot." Grace lowered the rifle, her heart pounding with exhilaration. She had done it. She had actually hit what she was aiming at. "I cannot believe I did that." "I can. I knew you could from the moment you picked up that knife and started whittling without giving up." Sam took the rifle from her, his large hands brushing against hers, and Grace felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear. She had been so focused on learning from him, on absorbing his calm confidence and his patient teaching, that she had not allowed herself to notice how attractive he was. Or rather, she had noticed it was impossible not to notice those broad shoulders and powerful arms, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was pleased, the rare smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish, but she had not let herself dwell on it. Now, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to smell the scent of pine and leather and wood smoke that clung to him, Grace felt something shift inside her. This was not just gratitude or admiration. This was something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken and her breath shallow. If Sam noticed her reaction, he gave no sign. He simply slung the rifle over his shoulder and gestured toward the cabin. "Come on, let us get some water. Target shooting is thirsty work." But as they walked side by side, Grace caught him glancing at her, and there was something in that look, something warm and wondering that made her think perhaps he felt it too. The situation at the saloon was improving slowly. Grace had been working there for 3 weeks now, and while she was far from perfect, she had not broken anything in over a week. Mr. Henderson had even granted her a grudging compliment, saying she was getting the hang of it. It was not much, but it was more praise than Grace had received in months. Yet despite this progress, she found her thoughts constantly drifting to the mountain, to the cabin in the clearing, to Sam Foster and the way he looked at her like she was someone worth believing in. She had never felt this way about a man before. Her father had kept her sheltered, and then after his death, she had been too consumed with survival to think about romance. But now, in the quiet moments of the day, she would catch herself wondering what it would be like to kiss Sam, to run her fingers through his long hair, to feel those strong arms wrap around her. One afternoon in early June, when the New Mexico sun blazed hot and bright, Grace climbed the trail to find Sam working on expanding a corral next to his cabin. His shirt was off, hanging on a fence post, and sweat gleamed on the powerful muscles of his back and chest. He was driving posts into the ground with a sledgehammer, each strike precise and forceful. He looked up when he heard her approach, and a smile spread across his face. That smile did things to Grace's heart that she was not entirely prepared for. "Grace, I was hoping you would come today." "You were." She tried to keep her voice steady, casual, but it came out slightly breathless. "I wanted to show you something. I have been working on it all week." He set down the hammer and led her around to the side of the cabin where a fenced garden plot had been cleared and prepared. "I thought you might like to try your hand at growing things. I have got seeds for vegetables, herbs, some flowers. Nothing to be afraid of with plants. You just put them in the ground, give them water and sun, and they do most of the work themselves." Grace stared at the rich, dark soil, at the neat rows Sam had marked out, at the collection of seed packets laid carefully on a flat rock. He had done this for her. He had spent days preparing this space because he thought it might help her build her confidence. "Sam, I do not know what to say." "Say you will give it a try. I will help you, show you what to do. But this will be your garden, Grace. Something you can tend and watch grow. Something that will not break or tear or get ruined if you make a small mistake." The emotion that welled up in Grace's throat was so powerful that she could not speak. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Sam, pressing her face against his chest. He stiffened for just a moment, surprised, and then his arms came around her, tentative at first, then stronger, pulling her close. He was so big that she felt almost engulfed by him, sheltered and safe in a way she had not felt since her father died. "Thank you," she whispered against his skin, feeling the steady thunder of his heartbeat. "Thank you for everything. For being kind to me, for teaching me, for believing I could do things when I did not believe it myself." Sam's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers threading gently through her hair. "You are not hard to believe in, Grace Lawson. You are stronger than you know. I just wish you could see yourself the way I see you." She pulled back enough to look up at his face. His eyes were soft, full of an emotion that made her breath catch. "And how do you see me?" "I see a woman who has been knocked down over and over but who keeps getting back up. I see someone who is brave enough to admit when she is scared, brave enough to try again even after failing. I see someone beautiful and kind and worth knowing." His voice had dropped to barely more than a rumble, intimate and low. "I see someone I think about every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep." Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. "Sam, I think about you too, all the time. I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone. I was too afraid of everything, including this, including what I am feeling right now." "And what are you feeling right now?" "Like I want you to kiss me. Like I have wanted that for weeks, but was too frightened to admit it." Sam's hand moved from her hair to cup her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek with surprising gentleness for such a large, rough hand. "I have wanted that too, more than you know. But Grace, I need you to be sure. I am not the kind of man who does things halfway. If I kiss you, if we start down this path, I am going to want all of you. I am going to want to build a life with you. I know that might sound too fast, too much, but I have lived alone long enough to know what I want when I find it." "I am sure," Grace said, and she was. For the first time in her life, she felt absolutely certain of something. "I am terrified, but I am sure I want this. I want you." When Sam's lips met hers, it was like coming home to a place she had never been. His kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, as if he was afraid of overwhelming her. But Grace pressed closer, her hands sliding up over the firm muscles of his bare chest and around his neck, and Sam groaned low in his throat. His arms tightened around her, lifting her nearly off her feet, and the kiss deepened, becoming hungry and urgent. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "Grace, I think I am falling in love with you. No, that is not right. I think I have already fallen." Tears sprang to Grace's eyes, but for once they were not tears of fear or frustration. They were tears of joy, of relief, of finally finding something good and real in her life. "I love you too, Sam. I did not think I was capable of it, did not think anyone would ever love me, but here you are and here I am, and it is real." "It is real," he confirmed, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips again. "It is the most real thing I have ever felt." They spent the rest of that afternoon planting the garden together. Sam showed Grace how to prepare the soil, how deep to plant each seed, how to space them properly. His hands covered hers as he guided her, and every touch felt like a promise. They talked about everything and nothing, learning the rhythms of each other's voices, the cadence of each other's laughter. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sam walked Grace back down the trail toward town. They held hands, their fingers intertwined, and neither of them wanted to let go. "When can I see you again?" Sam asked as the first buildings of Silver City came into view. "Tomorrow, I do not work until evening. Come early then, stay for dinner, stay as long as you want." He squeezed her hand. "Grace, I meant what I said earlier. I want to build a life with you. I know we have only known each other a month, but out here, that does not matter as much as it might back east. What matters is what we feel, what we know in our hearts. And I know you are the woman I want beside me." "I want that too," Grace said, her voice steady and sure. "But Sam, I am still afraid sometimes. I am still going to make mistakes and fail at things. I am not suddenly perfect just because I am in love with you. I do not want perfect. Perfect is boring. I want you with all your fears and doubts and the mistakes you are going to make. Because I am going to make mistakes too. We will just make them together and help each other through them." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You are discovering your own strength, Grace. I can see it happening day by day. Pretty soon you are not going to need me to encourage you. You are going to know deep down just how capable you really are." "I will always need you," Grace said softly. "Maybe not to tell me I can do things, but just to be there, to love me, to be my partner. Then that is what I will be. For as long as you will have me." The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness that Grace had never imagined possible. She would spend her mornings at Sam's cabin, working in the garden that was now showing tiny green shoots pushing up through the soil. She learned to cook over his fireplace, to preserve meat, to sew leather, to do 100 small tasks that frontier life required. And with each new skill she mastered, her confidence grew. The voice that had told her she was worthless and incapable grew quieter, until some days she hardly heard it at all. Her work at the saloon improved dramatically. Mr. Henderson even gave her a small raise and more responsibilities. Other employees began to come to her for help with tasks, trusting her competence. It was a strange, wonderful feeling to be relied upon instead of doubted. But the best part of every day was the time she spent with Sam. They would sit on the porch of his cabin as the sun set, talking about their dreams and plans. Sam wanted to expand his land, maybe start raising horses. Grace wanted to learn to read better. Her father had taught her only the basics, and Sam began teaching her in the evenings, reading aloud from his small collection of books while she followed along. They kissed often, stolen moments of passion that left them both breathless and wanting more. But Sam was respectful, never pushing beyond what was proper before marriage. "When you are my wife," he would murmur against her lips, I am going to show you just how much I love you, but not before. I want to do this right." It was in late July, as they were harvesting the first vegetables from Grace's garden, that Sam went down on one knee in the dirt, holding a simple gold band that he said had belonged to his mother. "Grace Lawson, you have brought more light and joy into my life than I ever thought possible. You have shown me that strength is not just about physical power, but about getting back up after falling, about facing your fears, about choosing love even when you are scared. Will you marry me? Will you stay up here on this mountain and build a life with me?" Grace dropped the basket of green beans she had been holding, and they scattered across the ground. But for once, she did not care about the mess. She launched herself at Sam, knocking him backward into the dirt, kissing him with all the love and gratitude and joy that overflowed from her heart. "Yes," she said between kisses. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in August in the small church in Silver City. Grace wore a simple blue dress that she had sewn herself, and Sam wore clean trousers and a white shirt, his long hair tied back, his beard neatly trimmed. Mr. Henderson closed the saloon for the afternoon, so everyone could attend, and it seemed like half the town showed up to witness the mountain man, and the once timid waitress pledged their lives to each other. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Sam kissed Grace with a tenderness that made several of the women in attendance dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Then he swept her up into his arms, making her laugh and blush, and carried her out of the church to the wagon he had driven into town. They rode back up the mountain together, Grace nestled against Sam's side, both of them eager to begin their life together in earnest. The cabin seemed different somehow, more like a home now that Grace knew she would never leave it. Sam had spent the past weeks making improvements, building new furniture, adding small touches that he thought she would like. That night, Sam made love to his wife with a gentleness and passion that took her breath away. His powerful body was so careful with hers, his large hands tender and worshipful as they learned every curve and hollow. And Grace, who had been afraid of so many things, found that she was not afraid of this. In Sam's arms, she felt only love and safety and a burning desire that matched his own. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, skin to skin, hearts beating in sync. Sam traced lazy patterns on Grace's bare shoulder, and she played with the hair on his chest, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "I love you, Mrs. Foster," Sam rumbled, his voice heavy with satisfaction and contentment. "I love you too, Mr. Foster." Grace propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Sam, I need to tell you something. A few months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I was completely worthless, that I would never amount to anything, that I would die alone and forgotten. And then I met you and everything changed. You showed me that I was wrong about myself. You helped me see that I am stronger than I believed. But more than that, you loved me. You chose me. And that has made all the difference." Sam pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You did the work, Grace. I just stood beside you while you found your own strength. I am so proud of you, of the woman you have become." "The woman I am becoming," Grace corrected. "I am still learning, still growing. But now I know I can do it. I am not afraid anymore." "Well, I am still afraid sometimes, but it does not control me the way it used to." As the summer faded into autumn, Grace settled into her new life with a contentment she had never imagined possible. She tended her garden, which produced an abundant harvest of vegetables that she preserved for the winter. She learned to help Sam with his trapping and hunting, becoming a skilled shot with the rifle and able to track game through the forest. She kept the cabin clean and warm, cooked hearty meals, and managed their small household with increasing confidence. But more than any specific skill, Grace discovered something profound about herself. She discovered that failure was not the end of the world. When she burned a pot of stew, she simply made more. When she missed a shot at a deer, she tracked it and tried again. When she planted seeds that did not germinate, she replanted with different ones. Each small failure was just a learning experience, not a referendum on her worth as a person. And through it all, Sam was there. Not hovering or micromanaging, but present. A steady, loving presence who celebrated her successes and encouraged her through her setbacks. He treated her as a partner, asking her opinion on decisions, trusting her judgment, respecting her ideas. With him, Grace learned what it felt like to be valued, to be seen as capable and competent. Their love deepened through the quiet intimacy of daily life. They developed routines and rituals, small things that were theirs alone. Every morning, Sam would wake before dawn and start the fire, then return to bed to hold Grace for a few precious minutes before they had to begin the day's work. Every evening they would walk together around their property, checking on the animals and the garden, talking about their day. And every night, they would come together in their bed, expressing their love physically with a passion that never seemed to dim. In October, Grace realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Sam the news as they sat by the fireplace one cool evening. She was nervous about his reaction, about whether she would be a good mother, about all the ways she might fail at this new challenge. But Sam's face lit up with such pure joy that her fears melted away. He pulled her into his lap, cradling her with infinite care, his large hands splaying protectively over her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Grace asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. Grace, you have given me everything. A home, a love, a purpose beyond just surviving, and now a child. You have made my life so full, so rich. I cannot wait to meet this little one, to raise them with you, to watch them grow. What if I am a terrible mother? What if I make mistakes? What if Sam silenced her with a kiss. "You are going to make mistakes. So am I. Every parent does. But our child is going to grow up loved and secure, with a mother who is strong and brave and kind, and a father who will protect them and teach them everything I know. That is what matters." Grace leaned into her husband's strength, letting his confidence bolster her own. He was right. She was not the same frightened, defeated woman who had stumbled into Silver City barely able to hold a job. She was Grace Foster, wife to a mountain man, homesteader, gardener, hunter, and soon-to-be mother. She had discovered her own strength, and while she still had moments of doubt, they no longer defined her. The winter of 1878 was long and cold, with heavy snows that blanketed the mountains and kept Grace and Sam close to the cabin for weeks at a time. But inside, they were warm and content. Sam had laid in plenty of supplies, and Grace had preserved enough food from her garden to see them through. They spent the long evenings by the fire, reading together, playing cards, talking about what they would name the baby. Grace's belly grew round and full as the months passed. Sam was endlessly fascinated by the changes in her body, by the way the baby moved and kicked. He would rest his head on her stomach and talk to their unborn child, telling stories about the mountains and the animals, about his own childhood, about the mother he was so eager to meet. As her pregnancy advanced, Grace found herself dealing with new challenges. She was tired all the time, her back ached, and she could no longer do some of the heavier tasks around the homestead. At first, this frustrated her. She did not want to be useless again, did not want to be a burden, but Sam would not hear of it. "You are growing our child," he would tell her firmly, taking whatever task she was attempting out of her hands. "That is the most important work there is. Everything else can wait, or I can do it. You just take care of yourself and the baby." And so Grace learned another important lesson, that accepting help was not the same as being weak. That letting others care for you was not a failure but a gift you could give them. Sam wanted to take care of her, and by letting him, she was showing him trust and love. In April of 1879, as the snow was finally melting and the first wildflowers were pushing up through the wet earth, Grace went into labor. Sam rode down to Silver City at a gallop to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Peterson, who had delivered dozens of babies in the territory. She arrived at the cabin to find Grace walking around outside, breathing through contractions, remarkably calm. "This is not your first, is it?" Mrs. Peterson asked, impressed by Grace's composure. "It is," Grace said, pausing as another wave of pain rolled through her. "But I am not afraid. I know my body knows what to do. I just have to trust it." It was a long labor, lasting through the afternoon and into the evening. Sam stayed by Grace's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement. And when Grace felt like she could not do it anymore, when the pain was so intense she wanted to give up, Sam looked into her eyes and said the words she needed to hear. "You are the strongest person I know, Grace Foster. You have overcome so much to get to this moment. You can do this. I believe in you." And she did it. With a final tremendous effort, she brought their child into the world, a boy, healthy and squalling, with a thick shock of dark hair and powerful lungs. "A son," Sam said, his voice breaking as Mrs. Peterson placed the baby in his arms. He looked down at the tiny, perfect face, then at Grace, and tears streamed unashamedly down his cheeks. "Grace, he is beautiful. You did it. You were amazing." Grace, exhausted but exhilarated, reached for her baby. Sam placed him gently in her arms, and she gazed down at the little life they had created. All the fear, all the doubt, all the failures of her past seemed to fall away in that moment. This was what mattered. This love, this family, this future they were building together. "What should we name him?" she asked Sam, who sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around her shoulders, both of them unable to look away from their son. "I was thinking we could name him after your father." "What was his name?" "Robert. Robert James Lawson." Grace looked up at her husband with shining eyes. "But he was not always good to me, Sam. He loved me, but he did not believe in me the way you do." "Then we will raise our Robert to be different. We will raise him to be strong and capable and kind. We will teach him to believe in himself and in others. We will raise him the way you should have been raised, with love and encouragement." "Robert Foster," Grace said, trying it out. "Yes, I like that. But Sam, if he is anything like you, I know he will be a good man." They named him Robert Samuel Foster, and he was indeed a good baby, healthy and happy. Grace took to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to learning everything else. There were difficult moments, certainly. Nights when the baby would not stop crying and Grace felt helpless and inadequate. Times when she worried she was doing everything wrong. But she had learned to push through those moments, to ask for help when she needed it, to trust that she was enough. Sam was a devoted father, endlessly patient with his son. He would walk the floor with Robert for hours when the baby was fussy, his large hands so gentle as they cradled the tiny body. He sang to him in his deep, rumbling voice old mountain songs that his own father had sung. And as Robert grew from a newborn to an infant to a toddler, Sam was always there, teaching and protecting and loving. Grace's garden flourished in the summer of 1879, even bigger and more productive than the year before. She expanded it, adding new varieties of vegetables and herbs, even some flowers that she planted just for their beauty. She sold some of her surplus produce in Silver City, earning money that she saved carefully. It gave her pride to contribute to their household, to know that her work had value. In town, people treated her differently now. They saw her as Sam Foster's capable wife, as a homesteader and mother, as someone worthy of respect. The woman who had once been afraid of everything was now known as someone you could count on, someone who had made a good life in harsh country. When new settlers arrived in the area and needed advice, they would often be directed to Grace, who would share what she had learned about gardening and preserving food and surviving the long mountain winters. One afternoon in the fall, Grace was in the general store buying supplies when she overheard two women talking near the fabric counter. She recognized one of them as a recent arrival to Silver City, looking thin and worn, her clothes shabby and patched. "I just do not know if I can do this," the woman was saying to her companion, her voice trembling on the edge of tears. "Everything is so hard out here, and I feel like I fail at everything I try. Maybe I should just go back east." Grace set down the flour sack she had been examining and walked over to the women. "Excuse me, I could not help but overhear. I am Grace Foster. I live up in the mountains with my husband and son." The thin woman looked at her with desperate eyes. "I have heard of you. People say you are very capable, very skilled at homesteading." "I am now," Grace said with a gentle smile. "But 2 years ago I was exactly where you are. I had been fired from multiple jobs, I could not do anything right, and I thought I was completely worthless. I was terrified of everything." The woman's eyes widened. But everyone speaks so highly of you." "Because I learned something important. I learned that failure is not the end, it is just part of the process of getting stronger. Every time I failed at something, I learned a little more about how to succeed, and I had help. My husband believed in me even when I did not believe in myself. He encouraged me until I found my own strength." Grace reached out and squeezed the woman's hand. "You can do this. You are stronger than you think. You just have to give yourself permission to make mistakes and learn from them." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of relief and hope. "Thank you. I needed to hear that today." As Grace left the store, she realized how far she had truly come. She was now the one offering encouragement to others, passing on the wisdom that Sam had given her. The frightened girl who had arrived in Silver City was gone, replaced by a confident woman who knew her own worth. The years passed in a gentle rhythm of seasons and growth. Robert grew into a sturdy boy with his father's strength and his mother's determination. Grace and Sam had two more children, a daughter named Sarah in 1881 and another son, Thomas, in 1883. The cabin was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Sam and Grace working side by side to build additional rooms. Grace continued to develop her skills, becoming known throughout the area as an expert gardener and herbalist. People would ride up the mountain to ask her advice about sickly plants or to buy her healing salves and tinctures. She taught other women how to preserve food, how to make their gardens productive in the thin mountain soil, how to survive and even thrive in the harsh territory. But she never forgot where she had started. She never lost her empathy for those who struggled, who were afraid, who felt like failures. And she never took for granted the man who had seen her potential when she could not see it herself. Sam remained her anchor, her partner, her great love. As they grew older together, working side by side to build their homestead and raise their children, their bond only deepened. They still walked together every evening, still held each other close every night, still found joy in the simple intimacy of shared life. One summer evening in 1885, after the children had been tucked into bed, Grace and Sam sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Grace was 31 now, Sam 35, and they had been married for 7 years. 7 years that had been filled with hard work and challenge and profound happiness. "You remember the first day I came here?" Grace asked, leaning against her husband's solid shoulder. I was so lost, so afraid of everything. I remember thinking you were the saddest thing I had ever seen, Sam said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. And I remember thinking that underneath all that fear was someone special, someone worth knowing. I am glad I was right. You were more than right. Sam, you saved my life, not by rescuing me from danger, but by teaching me to rescue myself, by showing me that I was capable of so much more than I believed. You saved mine too, you know. I was just surviving before you came along, just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to really live, a purpose beyond just getting by. You gave me love and family and happiness. I would not trade these years for anything. Grace turned in his arms to kiss him properly, long and sweet and full of the love that had only grown stronger with time. I love you, Samuel Foster. Thank you for encouraging me until I discovered my own strength. Thank you for believing in me. I love you too, Grace Foster, and I always will. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Grace had come to the mountains as a frightened failure, but she had become so much more. She had become a wife, a mother, a skilled homesteader, and most importantly, she had become a woman who knew her own worth. The fear that had once ruled her life still whispered sometimes, in moments of stress or uncertainty, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned to acknowledge it, to thank it for trying to keep her safe, and then to move forward anyway. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. And she had learned that love, true love, was not about one person rescuing another. It was about two people standing side by side, supporting each other, believing in each other, helping each other become the best versions of themselves. Sam had encouraged her, yes, but she had done the hard work of changing. And in turn, she had given him the gift of a full, rich life surrounded by love. As the years continued to pass, Grace and Sam's children grew strong and capable. Robert became a skilled hunter like his father, but he also inherited his mother's gentleness and empathy. Sarah had Grace's way with plants and Sam's fearlessness, a combination that made her a force to be reckoned with. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, equally comfortable with a book or an axe. Grace taught all of them the lessons she had learned. She taught them that failure was not something to fear but an opportunity to learn. She taught them to be kind to themselves and others, to ask for help when they needed it, to believe in their own strength. And most importantly, she taught them by example, living every day as proof that people could change, could grow, could overcome their deepest fears. In 1890, when Grace was 36 and Sam was 40, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary. The children had grown old enough to take over some of the homestead duties, giving Grace and Sam time to ride down into the valley together, something they had not done in years. They rode side by side through the summer landscape, past fields of wildflowers and through groves of aspen trees that whispered in the breeze. When they reached a high meadow with a view that stretched for miles, they dismounted and spread a blanket on the soft grass. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been?" Grace asked, lying back with her head pillowed on Sam's thigh. "What if I had never walked up that trail? What if you had sent me away that first day?" "I think we would have found each other somehow," Sam said, stroking her hair with his calloused hand. "Some things are just meant to be. You were meant to find your strength, and I was meant to be there to see it happen. We were meant to love each other and build this life together." "I like that idea, that some things are destined." Grace smiled up at him, seeing the silver that was beginning to thread through his hair, the lines that years of mountain sun had etched around his eyes. He was still the most handsome man she had ever seen, still strong and capable, still her protector and partner. Grace, I want you to know something. These years with you have been the best of my life. Watching you grow from that frightened girl into the confident, capable woman you are now has been my greatest privilege. Raising our children with you, building this homestead, just living day to day beside you. It has been everything I never knew I wanted. You are going to make me cry, Grace said, but she was smiling even as tears gathered in her eyes. Sam Foster, you are the best man I have ever known. You saw me when I was at my lowest and you did not judge me. You did not try to fix me or save me. You just believed in me and gave me space to find my own way. That was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. They made love there in the meadow, under the wide blue sky, with the same passion and tenderness that had always characterized their relationship. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked about the future, about watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own, about growing old together on their mountain, about all the years still ahead of them. By the mid-1890s, Grace and Sam's homestead had become one of the most successful in the region. Their garden was legendary, producing more than enough food for their family and plenty to sell or trade. Sam's trapping and hunting continued to provide income, and Robert had taken over much of that work, leaving Sam more time to focus on other projects. Sarah helped her mother with the garden and had started experimenting with breeding different plant varieties. Thomas had developed a talent for woodworking, making furniture and tools that were in high demand. Grace had become a pillar of the community, known not just for her skills but for her kindness and wisdom. Women would seek her out for advice about everything from gardening to marriage to raising children. And she always had time for them, especially for those who were struggling, who were afraid, who felt like they were failing at everything. She would tell them her story, about how she had arrived in Silver City unable to hold a job, terrified of her own shadow, convinced she was worthless. And then she would tell them about Sam, about how he had encouraged her without trying to do everything for her, about how he had helped her discover her own strength. And she would tell them the most important truth she had learned. That strength was not something you either had or did not have. It was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, failure by failure, success by success. In the spring of 1896, Grace received word that Mr. Henderson, the owner of the saloon where she had once worked, was gravely ill. She rode down to Silver City with Sam and visited him in his sick bed. The old man, now frail and diminished, looked up at her with surprise. "Grace Lawson. No, Grace Foster now. I heard you had done well for yourself." "I have," Grace said, sitting beside his bed. "Mr. Henderson, I wanted to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For nearly firing you every other day. For giving me a chance in the first place. For letting me keep trying even when I kept making mistakes. You were not always patient with me, but you did not give up on me either. That mattered more than you know." The old man's eyes grew watery. "I was too hard on you. You were just a scared girl trying to make her way, and I should have been kinder. You did what you could, and I learned from it. I learned that I could survive criticism, that I could pick myself up after failing and try again. Those were important lessons." Grace reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson, for everything." He died 2 days later, and Grace attended his funeral along with half the town. Standing in the cemetery, she thought about all the people who had been part of her journey from frightened failure to confident woman. Mr. Henderson had been one of them, even if he had not realized it at the time. Even the difficult relationships, the harsh words, the judgments had shaped her, had given her challenges to overcome. But the person who had made the most difference, who had fundamentally changed the course of her life, was standing beside her now. Sam, with his hand resting protectively on the small of her back, with his quiet strength and unwavering love. He had been her anchor when she was drifting, her teacher when she needed to learn, her champion when she needed someone to believe in her. As they rode back up the mountain after the funeral, Grace found herself reflecting on the path her life had taken. 20 years ago, she had been a frightened girl who thought she would die alone and forgotten. Now she was a woman with a loving husband, 3 healthy children, a thriving homestead, and the respect of her community. She had discovered not just that she was capable, but that she was strong, not in spite of her failures and fears, but because of them. Every challenge she had faced, every time she had fallen and gotten back up, had forged her into who she was now. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Winter snows gave way to spring flowers, which yielded to summer heat, which faded into autumn gold. Grace's children grew into young adults, each finding their own path while remaining close to their parents and to each other. Robert married a young woman from Silver City and built a cabin on the far edge of Sam and Grace's property. Sarah, independent and fierce, announced her intention to go to Denver to study horticulture, and though Grace worried, she supported her daughter's dream. Thomas remained at home for now, helping his father and continuing his woodworking. In 1900, on a warm June evening, Grace and Sam celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary. Their children had prepared a feast, and friends from Silver City and the surrounding homesteads rode up to join the celebration. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and a sense of community and love that filled Grace's heart to overflowing. As the party wound down and the guests began to depart, Sam took Grace's hand and led her away from the cabin, up a trail they had walked together countless times. They climbed to a high point that looked out over the valley, over the lights of Silver City twinkling in the distance, over the dark shapes of the mountains against the star-filled sky. Grace Foster, 22 years ago I married the woman I loved, and every day since then I have loved you more. You have given me 3 incredible children, a beautiful home, a full and happy life. But more than that, you have inspired me. Watching you overcome your fears and discover your strength has been the greatest privilege of my life. Grace leaned into her husband's embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. Sam Foster, 22 years ago I was terrified of making a mistake in front of preacher. Do you remember how my voice shook when I said my vows? I remember thinking that even scared, you were the bravest person I knew, because you said those vows anyway. That is what you taught me. That courage is not about never being afraid. It is about doing what you need to do even when you are terrified. Grace turned in his arms to look up at his face, at the man who had been her rock for more than 2 decades. I was afraid of failing at everything, but you encouraged me until I discovered my own strength. And now I am not afraid anymore. Well, I am afraid of losing you someday, of something happening to our children, of the normal fears that come with loving people so deeply. But I am not afraid of myself anymore. I am not afraid of trying new things, of making mistakes, of being less than perfect. You were always perfect to me, Sam said, cupping her face in his large hands. From that very first day when you were so nervous you could barely speak, I thought you were perfect. And I still do. Not because you are flawless, but because you are real. Because you have fought for every bit of happiness in your life. Because you have never given up, not on yourself, not on us, not on anything that mattered. They kissed as the stars wheeled overhead, 2 people who had found each other in the vastness of the frontier and had built something that would endure. Their love was a living thing, constantly growing and changing, deepening with every shared challenge and triumph. As the years moved into the new century, Grace found herself in her 50s, then her 60s. Her hair turned gray, her hands showed the marks of decades of hard work, and her body was not as strong as it once had been, but her spirit remained fierce and bright. She continued to tend her garden, though she accepted more help now. She continued to offer advice and encouragement to those who needed it, and she continued to love her husband with the same intensity she had felt as a young bride. Sam aged too, his beard going completely white, his powerful frame becoming a bit stooped. But his eyes were still sharp, his mind still clear, and his love for Grace still the central fact of his existence. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, holding hands, watching the sun set over the mountains they had called home for so many years. Robert and his wife had given them 5 grandchildren, rambunctious and full of life. Sarah had returned from Denver with a husband and 2 children of her own, and had established a successful plant nursery near Silver City. Thomas had married a widow with 3 children, becoming a father overnight and embracing the role with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. Grace and Sam's cabin was often filled with the chaos and joy of grandchildren, and Grace found that she loved being a grandmother almost as much as she had loved being a mother. She told the children stories about the old days, about how Silver City had been when she first arrived, about the challenges and adventures of frontier life. And she told them about how their grandfather had taught her to be brave, to believe in herself, to discover her own strength. The grandchildren adored Sam, climbing on him like he was a friendly mountain, begging for rides on his broad shoulders. And Sam, despite his advancing years, was endlessly patient with them, teaching them to whittle and track and shoot, passing on all the skills he had learned over a lifetime in the mountains. In the summer of 1910, Grace turned 63 and Sam turned 67. They had been married for 32 years, and they had built a legacy that extended far beyond their own lives. Their children were successful and happy. Their grandchildren were healthy and thriving, and the lessons they had taught about resilience and courage and love were being passed down through generations. One evening in late August, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Grace felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfection, not the absence of challenges or sorrow, but the deep contentment that came from a life well lived, from love given and received, from battles fought and won. Sam, do you remember when you told me I just needed to find one thing I could do without being afraid? And you gave me that knife and piece of wood, I remember. You were so nervous your hands were shaking, but you did it anyway. That was the moment everything changed for me. That was when I started to believe, just a little bit, that maybe I was not completely worthless. Maybe I could learn and grow and become someone better. Grace squeezed his hand. You gave me that moment. You gave me the chance to discover that I was stronger than I thought. You were always strong, Grace. You just needed to see it for yourself. We have had a good life, have we not? Despite all the challenges, all the hard times, all the fears I had to overcome, we built something beautiful together. The most beautiful thing I ever had a part in, Sam agreed, his voice deep and warm. And it is not over yet. We still have years ahead of us, years to watch our grandchildren grow, years to enjoy this life we have built. And they did have more years, good years filled with love and family and the simple pleasures of mountain life. But eventually, as it must for everyone, the time came for their story to draw to a close. Sam passed away peacefully in the winter of 1915, sitting in his favorite chair by the fireplace with Grace holding his hand. His last words were, "You were my greatest adventure, Grace Foster. My greatest love, Grace mourned him deeply, but she did not break. The strength she had discovered all those years ago, the strength Sam had helped her find, sustained her through her grief. She stayed in the cabin they had built together, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, living independently almost until the end. When Grace herself passed away in the spring of 1918 at the age of 71, it was in the bed she had shared with Sam, in the cabin that had been their home for 40 years. Her children and grandchildren gathered around her, and with her last breaths, she told them the story one more time. The story of a frightened young woman who thought she was a failure at everything, and the mountain man who encouraged her until she discovered her own strength. "Remember," she whispered, her voice faint but steady, "that you are all stronger than you know. Life will knock you down and you will make mistakes, and sometimes you will be so afraid you can barely move. But you can get back up. You can try again. You can discover your own strength just like I did. And when you do, it will change everything." Those were Grace Foster's last words, a final gift of wisdom and encouragement to the family she and Sam had created. And in the years that followed, that story was passed down through generations, along with the lessons it contained. About courage and resilience, about the power of believing in someone, about how love could help people become the best versions of themselves. The cabin in the mountains eventually fell into ruin, reclaimed by the wilderness that surrounded it. But the legacy of Grace and Sam Foster lived on in their descendants, in the values they had instilled, in the example they had set. They had proven that people could change, could overcome their deepest fears, could build beautiful lives in harsh places. And that love, true love, was the greatest adventure of all in Silver City. A small plaque was eventually placed in the town square, commemorating Grace Foster as one of the pioneers who had helped build the community. It reads simply, "Grace Foster, 1847–1918. Wife, mother, pioneer. She discovered her own strength and taught others to find theirs." It was a fitting tribute to a woman who had started her journey terrified of failing at everything, but who had ended it as someone who had succeeded at the things that mattered most. She had loved deeply and been loved in return. She had raised children and tended her garden and built a home. She had faced her fears and found courage. She had failed many times, but she had never given up. And through it all, she had stood beside a mountain man with strong arms and a kind heart, who had seen her potential before she could see it herself, who had encouraged her without trying to do everything for her, who had loved her unconditionally while helping her become the person she was meant to be. Together, they had created something that endured long after they were gone, a love story that became legend in the wild and beautiful mountains of New Mexico. The sun continued to rise and set over those mountains, over the valley where Silver City nestled, over the place where Grace and Sam had built their life together. And if you knew where to look, if you climbed high enough into the foothills, you could still find traces of their garden, where wildflowers now grew among the herbs and vegetables Grace had once planted. It was a small reminder that even the most fragile seeds, given the right conditions and care, could take root and flourish in the harshest soil. Just like Grace herself had done, all those years ago when a mountain man named Samuel Foster had looked at a frightened, failing young woman and seen not what she was, but what she could become. And with patience and encouragement and unwavering belief, he had helped her discover her own strength. It was a love story for the ages, played out against the backdrop of the Wild West, and it ended not with tragedy but with triumph, not with loss but with legacy, not with fear but with the quiet certainty that love, in the end, conquered all.